The skies had darkened with an ominous swirl of clouds, a tempest on the verge of breaking. Brother Aldrich quickened his pace, his worn sandals slapping against the dirt path as the fat drops of rain began to fall. He clutched the hood of his tattered robe, pulling it tight over his head to shield himself from the coming storm. The road had been long, and his legs ached with the weight of many miles. But now, as the heavens opened in a torrential downpour, he sought desperately for shelter. Through the sheets of range, a shape loomed in the distance, tall, imposing, and nearly swallowed by the encroaching forest. The ancient abbey seemed to emerge from the mist like a ghost. Its once majestic towers and spires now stood crumbling and broken, jagged teeth against the stormy sky. Vines and moss had claimed its walls, nature's slow reclamation of the man-made structure. The sight of the abbey, foreboding as it was, offered the only promise of sanctuary from the elements. Aldrich hesitated. Even in his travels he had heard the tales, the whispered warnings of the Crimson Abbey, so named for the blood that was said to stain its stones. The plague that swept through the land decades ago had claimed the lives of the monks who resided within, their bodies left to rot when the place was sealed by the terrified villagers. Few had dared enter since, and those who did were said never to return. But the storm was fierce, and the winds howled as if urging him forward. Aldrich knew he had little choice. With a deep breath and a silent prayer, he pressed on towards the abbey. The gates were ajar, creaking on rusted hinges as the wind pushed them open. Aldrich stepped inside the courtyard, the cobblestones slick with rain. The air was heavy with moisture, and the scent of decay lingered like an unwelcome guest. His eyes were drawn to the chapel at the heart of the abbey, its doors slightly ajar, inviting him in with a sinister promise. He crossed the courtyard, his footsteps echoing unnervingly in the stillness. Inside the chapel, the dim light of his lantern cast long shadows on the wall. The pews, once neatly arranged, were overturned and broken. The altar at the far end draped in tattered cloth. Candles that should have long burned out flickered weakly, as though waiting for him. Aldrich shuddered. He could not shake the feeling that he was being watched, but he saw no one. The abbey seemed empty, devoid of life, yet something lingered, a presence that sent chills down his spine. Who seeks shelter in this cursed place? The voice, soft and melodic, broke the silence. Aldrich whirled around, his heart pounding in his chest. Standing before him was a figure, cloaked in the same monastic garb as his own. The man's face was obscured by the shadows of his hood, but his posture was relaxed, almost welcoming. "I am Brother Aldrich," he replied cautiously, gripping the handle of his lantern tighter. "I mean no harm. I seek only shelter from the storm." The figure nodded slowly, stepping closer. "Many have come here seeking shelter, Brother Aldrich. but few have left. Aldrich frowned, a sense of unease setting over him. And you? How long have you been here? The figure tilted his head as if contemplating the question. I have been here long enough to know the truth of this place. Long enough to know its secrets. Aldrich felt a prickle of fear. What truth do you speak of? The figure's voice grew softer, almost a whisper. This abbey is cursed, Brother Aldrich. Cursed by the sins of those who once dwelt here. They could not escape their fate, and neither shall you. Aldrich took a step back, his heart racing. Who are you? The figure did not answer. Instead, he turned and began to walk towards the altar. His movements fluid and silent. Aldrich hesitated for a moment, then followed, compelled by a morbid curiosity. As they approached the altar, the figure gestured to the cloth that draped over it, beckoning Aldrich to pull it away. With trembling hands, Aldrich did as he was bade. The cloth fell to the ground, revealing the altar beneath. It was not made of stone as he had expected, but of bones, human bones, bleached white and meticulously arranged. Skulls stared back at him, empty eye sockets filled with a malevolent darkness. Blood, long dried but still vivid, stained the bones, giving them a crimson hue. Aldrich recoiled in horror, nearly dropping his lantern. What is this? The figure's voice was calm, almost serene. The price of sin, Brother Aldrich. The monks who once lived here committed terrible crimes, and they paid for it with their lives. Now their spirits are bound to this place, forever tormented by their guilt. Aldrich shook his head, his mind reeling. But why? What did they do? The figure sighed, a sound filled with sorrow. They betrayed their vows. They allowed greed and corruption to take root in their hearts. They stole from the villagers, hoarding wealth while their people starved. When plague came, they locked themselves inside the abbey, abandoning the sick and dying to their fate. They believed they could escape the wrath of the gods, but they were wrong. Aldrich felt a cold sweat on his brow. And you? How do you know of this? The figure turned to face him, and for the first time, Aldrich saw his face. It was pale, almost translucent, with hollow cheeks and sunken eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. The sight of it sent a jolt of terror through him, and he staggered back. I am one of them, the figure said, his voice echoing in the chapel. I am one of the monks who send, and I am bound to this place, just as you will be. Aldrich's breath caught in his throat. No, I won't. I can leave. I can... You cannot, Brother Aldrich, the ghostly monk interrupted, his voice cold and final. The doors are sealed. You are trapped, just as we are. There is no escape. Aldrich turned, panic rising in his chest. He ran towards the chapel doors, but they slammed shut with a deafening crash before he could reach them. He pounded on the wood, desperation in his every movement, but the doors did not budge. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling like a chorus of damned souls. "Let me out!" Aldrich cried, his voice cracking with fear. "Please, let me out." The ghostly monk watched him with pity. "There is no escape, Brother Aldrich. You must face the truth, as did we all." Aldrich spun around, his back pressed against the door. But what truth? What must I do?" The monk's eyes glowed brighter, and the chapel seemed to darken around them. "You must confess the sins of the past. Only then can you find peace." Aldrich shook his head, tears beginning to stream down his face. "But I have done nothing wrong. I'm innocent." The monk's expression softened, but there was no comfort in his words. "Innocence is a fleeting thing, Brother Aldrich. We are all guilty of something, whether we realize it or not." The ground beneath Aldrich's feet began to tremble, and the air grew thick with the stench of decay. Shadows moved in the corners of the chapel, taking on the shapes of long-dead monks. They emerged from the darkness, their forms twisted and grotesque, their eyes burning with a fiery hatred. Aldrich cried out in terror as the spirits closed in around him, their voices a cacophony of anguish and despair. They reached out with skeletal hands, grasping at his robes, pulling him towards the altar of bones. He struggled, but their grip was unyielding, their strength born of the torment they had endured for centuries. "No, please, I'm not like you! I'm not like you!" The ghostly monk stepped forward, his voice rising above the others. "You are one of us now, Brother Aldrich. You have entered this cursed place, and you shall never leave." Aldrich's screams echoed through the chapel as the spirits dragged him to the altar. They forced him down, pressing his face against the cold, hard bones. The stench of death filled his nostrils, and he gagged, his body convulsing with fear. The ghostly monk knelt beside him, placing a hand on his head. "Confess your sins, Brother Aldrich. Only then can you find peace." Aldrich sobbed, his voice choked with terror. "I have nothing to confess. Please, I beg you, let me go." The spirits around him howled in fury, their voices like the wailing of banshees. The ghostly monk's grip tightened, his voice cold and merciless. "Confess, Brother Aldrich, or be damned for eternity." Aldrich's mind raced, desperate for any way to escape. He thought of his long journey, of the lives he had touched, the good deeds he had done, and the evil. But in the depths of his heart, he knew the truth. He knew of his sins. Aldrich's voice quivered, each word dragged from his throat like shards of glass. each confession a brutal stab to his soul. I have spat on the will of the gods, mocking their divine plan with blasphemous contempt. I have envied my brothers, not only for their success, but for their peace I sought to destroy in them. I coveted their possessions, stole from the monastery's coffers to feed my own greed, and cursed the name of the gods in my darkest hours. My heart swelled with malice, and I schemed to rise above my station, condemning an innocent man to rot in prison so I could secure a promotion within the ranks. The spirits snarled with vile satisfaction, their icy grip tightening as he continued, his voice a trembling echo of guilt. I have woven lies like a web, ensnaring others to shield myself, to manipulate and corrupt. I turn my back on those in need, not out of fear but with deliberate cruelty. Relishing in their suffering, I let the darkness rule me, betraying the sacred trust of my vows, twisting my duties into acts of wickedness and sin. The ghostly monk nodded, his eyes glowing with an eerie satisfaction. The truth weighs heavy on us all, Brother Aldrich, but it is not enough to confess. You must understand the consequences of your sins. Aldrich's breath came in ragged gasps, his body trembling uncontrollably. I do understand. I've been weak. I've been selfish. But I can change. I can atone. Please give me a chance to make things right. The monk's expression remained cold, unmoved by Aldrich's pleas. Redemption is not so easily won, brother. The Abbey's curse is born from the sins of those who sought to hide from their guilt, to bury it deep within these walls. They too believed they could atone, that they could escape the judgment that awaited them. But they were wrong, and now their souls are bound here, trapped in endless torment. You are no different. Aldrich's heart sank as the weight of the monk's words settled over him like a shroud. The spirits around him began to chant, their voices rising in a haunted melody that echoed through the chapel. The air grew colder and the shadows deepened, swallowing the last vestiges of light from the lantern. No, this can't be, Aldrich whispered, his voice trembling. There must be a way. There must be some way to break this curse. The ghostly monk's eyes gleamed with a malevolent light. There is only one way, Brother Aldrich. You must take the place of one of the souls bound here. Only then will you be free. Aldrich's eyes widened in horror as the full meaning of the words of the monk became clear. You want me to sacrifice myself, to become one of you? The monk nodded, his expression grim. It is the only way. The curse demands a soul to remain, to suffer in penance for the sins committed here. If you take the place of one of the trapped spirits, you may be able to free them, but you will be bound to this place forever, your soul condemned to share in our torment. Aldrich recoiled, his mind reeling at the thought. The idea of being trapped in this cursed abbey for all eternity, to endure the same torment as the damned souls around him, filled him with a terror unlike anything he had ever known. But if I do this, Aldrich stammered, if I take their place, what will happen to me? Will I be damned as they are? Will I suffer the same fate? The ghostly monk's voice softened, though there was no comfort in it. You will suffer, yes, but in doing so, you will atone for your sins and those of others. Your sacrifice will bring some measure of peace to the souls bound here, and perhaps in time, you will find peace as well. Aldrich's mind raced, torn between the instinct to flee and the sense of self-preservation that had guided him throughout his life. The thought of eternal torment was unbearable, yet the idea of leaving these souls to suffer, knowing that he had the power to help them, gnawed at some part of his conscience. He looked into the eyes of the ghostly monk, searching for any sign of hope, of mercy, but there was none. The monk's gaze was unwavering, his expression devoid of compassion. With a heavy heart, Aldrich bowed his head. If it will bring peace to these souls, if it is the only way to atone for my sins, then I will do it. I will take their place. The spirits around him fell silent, their chanting ceasing as they watched Aldrich with an eerie stillness. The ghostly monk nodded solemnly, as if acknowledging the weight of Aldrich's decision. Very well, the monk said, his voice echoing through the chapel. Prepare yourself, brother Aldrich. The transition will not be easy, and the pain you will endure is beyond anything you can imagine. But know this, your sacrifice will not be in vain. Aldrich closed his eyes, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt the spirit's hands release him, their touch replaced by a cold, suffocating pressure that seemed to seep into his very soul. The air grew thick with the scent of decay, and the shadows around him pulsed with a life of their own, as if the darkness itself was closing in on him. A deep, rumbling voice resonated from the walls of the abbey, a voice that seemed to come from the very stones themselves. The price of sin is suffering, and the wages of guilt are eternal. Brother Aldrich, you have chosen your fate. Now you shall know the torment of those who came before you. Aldrich cried out as a searing pain shot through his body, as if his very essence was being torn apart. The darkness around him swirled and writhed, and he felt himself being pulled into it, dragged into the abyss that had claimed so many before him. His screams echoed through the chapel, mingling with the mournful wails of the damned souls who had been trapped there for so long. As the pain reached its crescendo, Aldrich felt his consciousness begin to fade, his sense of self slipping away into the void. The last thing he heard before the darkness consumed him entirely was the ghostly monk's voice, calm and detached, as if he were reciting a prayer. "Rest now, Brother Aldrich. Your soul is bound to this place as ours are. But in your sacrifice there is hope that one day the curse will be lifted and we will all find peace." Then there was nothing. No light, no sound, no sensation. Only the endless, suffocating darkness.